they should change their character. This is note 315. He was initially talking about the distinctions, and I actually want to read some of this because it's a very powerful passage. Nietzsche is saying in this note that he wants to talk about morality within the race and classes, right? And he says the following. This is the bottom of page 173 if you have the Walter Kaufman text. If you're following along, it's note 315. Let me cap my marker so I don't lose my ink. What he's saying is that there is a pressure on the races, on class, to make this valuation change, right? In view of the fact that the effects and fundamental drives in every race and class express something of the conditions of their existence, race and class express something of their conditions, meaning for example, being black, there might be expressions that mannerisms, language, my vernacular, the type of music I listen to, the way in which I dress, the way in which I talk, the way in which I greet people. There are things that I express as a consequence of sort of my cultural, biological embodiment, right? It manifests. At least of the conditions under which they are prevailed for the longest time. To desire that they should be virtuous means, to desire that the class, the race, be virtuous. Remember, collectively now, not the individual, be virtuous means, and this is very important, right? That they change their character. So the first thing that we see, number one, is that they change their character, right? Shed their skin and blot out their past, right? So that the individual, and we've seen this before, the individual, in order to have a sense of communal identity, needs to shed that which identifies the individual as unique, right? My character as an individual needs to be shed in order for me to join the community, right? It needs to be shed in order for me to join the community. I lose myself as I join the community. As I said, not for bad or good, just sort of conceptual analysis. And, you know, people who are part of the occupation movement use this to your benefit to make sense of your movement, right? It's not my movement, but I participated in the movement. I've studied what there is to study of the movement. Now I'm applying philosophical concepts. Incorporate these findings, incorporate this understanding in order to make the movement stronger. Because if you don't recognize the limitations of communal collective activity, communal collective action, your movement will invariably collapse in on itself. There's no question of if it will collapse. It's when it will collapse. If you don't recognize the dangers inherent not in the occupation, but in any collective action, right? And one of the dangers in collective action is the individual's character is lost in this communal mentality, in this communal identity. The one thing that I have to say about the occupation, however, is it's a strength and a weakness, is the attempt to preserve the individual within the communal, right? This is why there might not be a voice collectively for the occupation movement. And I apologize that I'm infusing so much of the occupation discussion into the Nietzsche lecture series, but it's impossible for me at this particular point in time, after having participated, not to do this. So I have to filter this through. I have to filter the occupation sort of experience through the lecture series, for good or for bad. It's just the way that it's going to be. So they should change their character, right? There's a requirement on the individual to change their character. So in all honesty, I didn't say this during the video because I didn't want to be critical. But now I can be critical without sort of being condescending. As an academic, as a professor, it is important that you, the activist, if you're part of the occupation movement, maintain your identity in the movement, right? When I walk in and, you know, it was like, hi, my name's Bob. Hi, my name is Bob. I hear everybody say it. I'm like, wow, this is Fight Club. This is dangerous, right? People are sort of espousing things sort of just mindlessly, right? And you have to be careful when you do that, because your identity is lost. If someone with sinister motivations goes up there and I'm like, mic check, and I get a mic check, and then I just evoke sort of destruction, and people are mindlessly restating what it is that the speaker's stating without thinking about what it is that you're evoking, that could be dangerous. That could be very, very dangerous, right? So it's important to always make sure that you preserve a sense of self within the community, which is why I'm a solitary figure. I ran track, I became an academic and a professor. I don't play well with others, but I want to help others. So as a point of reference, make sure that the identity of the individual is preserved in the community, because Nietzsche would say that and he's right, the identity, I mean, we might be in an enormous paradigm shift if the occupation really becomes sort of solidified and it preserves a sense of true individuality within the communal. That is new. That is very new. And I want to be one of the first people to, and I am one of the first people to articulate it academically, and to have participated, right? Because this is what's important. This is what's important, right? It blots out the past. It blots out the past, right? Your past experience, the things, the individual experiences that you had as an individual are no longer of importance in collective action, in communal action. There is now an immersion in the present, for good or for bad, right? Sometimes being immersed in the now, in what is currently happening, can be, as we'll see in a second, or in a few minutes, can be intoxicating. It can be extremely intoxicating. That immersion, that sense of connectedness, that sense of belonging. But a lot of that sense of connectedness, of belonging, is there to preserve the community. So that, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, so that but just to give you an idea, I'll flesh this out more in a second. So that the intoxication, that feeling, that physical, biological feeling of collective chanting, of collective grouping, of collective action, of directedness, all of that sense of feeling, all of that biological sort of endorphins, all of the endorphins and the excitement that are released in that action are there to reinforce collective identity. And it is typically done, I'm not saying with respect to the occupation, but it is typically done without preserving the past, the individual's voice, right? So that the individual's past, the individual's experience, the individual's voice is lost within the community. Obviously, this has changed in the occupation, and I know this for a fact because I stayed for 4 hours and listened to many, many, many personal stories. It just blew me out the water, and I'm still sort of perplexed because I still don't know what it is. Is it communal individuality? If that's the case, then yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to study, right? It'll be interesting to study, and I'm positive a lot of research is going to come out of this. Number 3, cease to be distinct, right? Cease to be distinct, to assimilate. I'm not going to get into that, that's sort of obvious. And then number 4, great quote, note 315, means that they should begin to resemble one another in their needs and demands. More clearly, that they should perish, right? That they should resemble each other in their needs and demands. That insofar as we talk about collective action, typically, right, and this lecture is going to be complicated by this. If I were to give this lecture 2 weeks ago, before really an understanding of what the occupation movement was, I would just do my regular sort of Nietzsche lecture. After my experience with the occupation, I've recognized how revolutionary the movement really is, and it is in a state now where it will either identify itself as distinct, or it will fall victim to traditional